The last thing I said to my father before he died was, "I hate you." I've been trying to take it back ever since. I hadn't seen the house in almost a decade. But when I turned the corner and saw the chipped white fence, the cracked porch steps, the curtain that still hung half-torn in the living room window, it felt like time had folded in on itself, as if the last 10 years hadn't passed at all. Only I had changed. The house stayed the same, waiting. It was strange how a single place could hold so much of who you used to be. The smell of rain on the driveway, the shape of the trees bending over the front yard, the echo of a slamming door that once ended everything. All of it still there. Only softer. Faded by years, but not forgotten. I parked by the gate and turned off the engine. The silence that followed was heavier than I expected, like the world itself was holding its breath. For a long time, I couldn't make myself move. I just stared at the house, at the flickering porch light, wondering if she was inside. Wondering if she'd even want to see me. When I finally stepped out, my shoes sank into the soft dirt of the path I'd walked 1,000 times before. I remembered being 16, storming down that same path, shouting that I'd never come back. I remembered the way she stood on the porch, hands trembling, trying not to cry. I hadn't looked back then. I do now. There was no sound from inside, no shadow behind the curtains. I raised my hand and knocked. Once. Twice. Nothing. I almost turned away, and then the door opened. She stood there in the half-light of the hallway, smaller than I remembered, older in a way that broke something inside me. Her hair was gray now, her eyes tired but sharp. She didn't speak. She just looked at me, as if counting the years between us. "Hi, Mom," I said. Her lips trembled, and for a second, I thought she might cry. But she didn't. She just nodded once and stepped aside. "You're late," she said. It wasn't anger in her voice. More like exhaustion. A quiet kind of sadness that comes when you've stopped expecting things to get better. I walked in. The air smelled like cinnamon and dust, exactly how it used to when she baked on Sunday mornings. My throat tightened. Nothing had changed. Not the faded photographs on the walls, not the sound of the old clock ticking in the hall. It felt like stepping into a memory I'd been running from. My room was still there too. Same bed. Same wallpaper. Same photo of me and Dad on the shelf, his arm around me, both of us smiling like nothing bad could ever happen. But it had. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind hum through the cracks in the walls. I thought about all the birthdays I'd missed, the calls I hadn't made, the words I never said. I told myself I came back because I wanted to make peace. But deep down, I knew the truth. I came back because I couldn't live with the silence anymore. Outside, a storm began to form, thunder rolling somewhere far off. It felt like a warning. Or maybe a beginning. The next morning, the house was already awake before I was. I could hear her footsteps in the kitchen, steady and soft, like the rhythm of a life she had kept moving long after I'd left. The smell of coffee filled the air. She never forgot how I liked it, even though I hadn't been here in years. That alone almost broke me. When I came in, she didn't look up. She just slid a mug across the table and said, "You still take it black?" I nodded. "Yeah." A quiet beat. "Then, you used to hate it that way." "I guess people change," I said, though the way she smiled told me she didn't quite believe that. We ate breakfast in silence. The only sound was the spoon clinking against the edge of her cup and the faint hum of the old fridge. Every few seconds, I caught her glancing at me like she was trying to memorize my face again, to compare it with the version she remembered. She finally asked, "How long are you staying?" "I don't know yet." "That's what you said last time," she said, and even though her tone was soft, it hit harder than any accusation could have. After breakfast, she went to water the plants that were barely alive on the windowsill. I followed her without thinking, the way a child follows someone they still want to understand. "I didn't know if you'd want me here," I said quietly. She didn't turn. "Wanting has nothing to do with it. You're my daughter. That doesn't stop, no matter how long you're gone." That simple truth stung more than any anger could. I realized how much easier it had been to believe she hated me, because if she hated me, then I didn't have to face what I'd done. I stepped outside for air. The backyard was smaller than I remembered, the grass wild and untamed. The old swing my father built still hung from the oak tree, one rope frayed, the wood warped by rain. I touched it gently, half expecting it to collapse. It didn't. Funny how some things survive even when you think they shouldn't. "Do you still dream about him?" I asked when she joined me. She paused. "Every now and then. Sometimes he's still here, fixing that fence he never finished. Other times he's already gone, and I'm just waiting for you to come back." I swallowed hard. I should have been there that night. She looked at me then, really looked. No one was supposed to be there that night. Not even him. There was a long silence between us, but it wasn't empty. It was heavy, full of everything we had left unsaid. The apology sitting at the back of my throat, the forgiveness waiting quietly in hers. The sky began to gray with an afternoon drizzle, and she turned toward the house. "Come inside before you catch a cold," she said, the words automatic, motherly, unchanged. I followed her, and for a brief moment, it felt almost like home again. Later, as she washed the dishes and I stood beside her drying them, our hands brushed once. She didn't pull away. Neither did I. It wasn't forgiveness yet. But it was a start. That evening, the rain came harder. The kind of rain that fills the silence so you don't have to. Mom sat in the living room, folding laundry that didn't really need folding. I watched her for a while, realizing how many nights she must have done that alone, just to keep her hands busy when her heart was too heavy to rest. When the thunder rolled again, she looked up. "The storm's just like that night," she said quietly. "What night?" She hesitated. You know which one? I froze. Of course I did. I'd spent years pretending I didn't. The night my father never came home. I turned toward the window, but the reflection staring back at me wasn't my own. It was 17-year-old me, angry, selfish, terrified. The last thing I said to him before he left was, I wish you'd just disappear. And then he did. Mom must have seen something shift in my face, because she said softly, you don't have to carry it anymore. But she was wrong. I did. I carried it into every relationship, every city, every year of silence between us. I went upstairs, needing air, space, something. My old room smelled of dust and old paper. I started opening drawers, looking for nothing in particular, until I found a box under the bed. It was small, wooden, scratched at the edges. Inside were photos. Letters. And one folded sheet of paper with my name written in his handwriting. My throat went dry. It wasn't long, just a few lines, dated 2 days before the accident. You're growing up faster than I can keep up with. I know I make mistakes, but everything I do because I love you. Even if you can't see that yet. I read it over and over, as if the ink could rewrite time. My chest ached in that familiar, dull way, the kind that doesn't scream, just burns. I sat on the edge of the bed and finally cried, really cried, for the first time since the funeral. I didn't hear Mom come in. She stood in the doorway, quiet. When she saw what I was holding, her hand covered her mouth. You found it. You knew it was here? She nodded. I couldn't throw it away. I thought, maybe one day you'd need it more than I did. Her words shattered me. All these years, I thought I was the only one haunted by what I said, by what I didn't say. But she had been living in the same ghost story, just from another room. I told him I hated him, I whispered. She crossed the room and sat beside me. And he told me, right before he left, that he knew you didn't mean it. The rain outside slowed. A calm after the storm. And there, in that quiet, something inside me cracked open, not in pain this time, but in release. We sat together on the bed, both crying for different reasons, but somehow for the same thing. For him. For us. For all the time we lost. Mom reached for my hand. It's time to stop living in that night, she said. And for the first time, I believed her. The morning after the storm, the house was filled with a kind of fragile quiet. The kind that comes only after something has broken. The rain had washed the dust from the windows, and sunlight spilled across the floor in long, uneven streaks. For the first time since I'd come home, I didn't feel trapped in the walls of this house. I felt present. Mom was in the kitchen, flipping through an old recipe book. Her hands moved slower now, tracing each page as if the memories written between the stains could fall apart if she turned too fast. I was thinking, she said, not looking up, about making the apple pie he used to love. I froze. You haven't made that since. I know, she said, cutting me off. But maybe it's time. The idea hung between us like something sacred. A ritual from another life. I nodded, not trusting my voice. We worked together quietly. The way she handed me the knife, the way she rolled the dough, it felt like a language we both used to speak fluently, but had forgotten over the years. A language made of small gestures and unspoken forgiveness. At one point, she paused, looking at my hands. You cut apples just like him, she said with a small smile. I laughed through a sudden lump in my throat. Guess I learned something from him after all. The smell of cinnamon filled the air again, mixing with the crisp sweetness of baked apples. It was the same smell I remembered from my childhood, the one that meant safety, laughter, family. I realized I hadn't smelled it since the night he died. And yet, here it was again. Alive. When the timer rang, she opened the oven, and for a second the heat and light hit her face, making her look younger. We sat at the table, the pie steaming between us, and she cut 2 slices. To him, she said. I raised my fork. To him. We ate in silence. But this silence was different, softer, full of memory but not pain. Halfway through, she said, you know, after he died, I kept expecting you to come home. Every time the phone rang, I thought it was you. I tried to call, I said quietly. So many times. I just never pressed dial. She looked at me then, and I saw years of waiting, of hurt and love tangled together. I know, she said. I heard you anyway. It was such a strange thing to say, and yet it made perfect sense. Because maybe love isn't just about what we say, maybe it's about what the other person feels even when we're silent. After we finished, she stood and opened the back door. The air was fresh, clean after the rain. You should go see it, she said. What? The lake, she smiled. It's still there, you know. The place he used to take you. I hesitated, but something inside me stirred. I hadn't been to that lake since I was a child. Since before the accident. Now, the thought of it scared me, and somehow, I knew that was exactly why I had to go. As I stepped outside, the sunlight hit the wet grass, scattering tiny prisms of light. The world smelled alive again. And for the first time since I could remember, I wasn't afraid to follow where the past led. The lake was smaller than I remembered, but the air around it still carried the same quiet weight. The kind of silence that presses against your chest until you remember how to breathe again. The surface shimmered under the afternoon sun, ripples forming where the wind touched it, like fingerprints left by ghosts. I parked the car at the edge of the dirt path and stepped out slowly, feeling the damp earth give beneath my shoes. The last time I was here, I was a teenager, angry, desperate to prove I didn't need anyone. My father had brought me here to talk. I didn't listen. I can still hear his voice, the calm before I destroyed everything between us. One day, you'll understand that running isn't the same as moving on. I didn't understand then. I do now. The old dock was still there, half rotten, the wood gray and splintered. I walked to the edge, my reflection trembling in the water. It looked like someone else, someone worn, someone older, but still that same girl underneath, carrying a grief that never aged. I sat down. The boards creaked under my weight, a sound both familiar and fragile. I let my feet dangle above the water and watched the small waves lap against the wood. The wind picked up, brushing my hair across my face. For a second, I almost thought I heard him again, his laugh, soft and far away, blending with the sound of water. "Hi, Dad," I said quietly, feeling ridiculous, but also strangely at peace. I guess I finally made it back. A bird called from the trees, a sharp sound cutting through the stillness. The sunlight hit the lake in a way that made it almost blinding, like the world itself was exhaling. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the letter. The one I'd found in my old room. The paper was creased from how many times I'd unfolded it, the ink slightly smudged from my fingers. I read it one last time, my voice trembling as I whispered the words aloud. "Everything I do because I love you. Even if you can't see that yet." Tears came, slow but steady. I let them fall. There was no point holding them anymore. They hit the paper, leaving tiny dark spots before the wind took it from my hands. The letter lifted, floated for a moment like it couldn't decide whether to leave, and then landed gently on the water. I watched it drift away. Something in my chest eased, a pressure I'd carried for too long. The guilt, the anger, the need to rewrite the past. All of it felt smaller here, swallowed by the lake that had seen everything and said nothing. Behind me, footsteps crunched on the path. I turned, half expecting no one, but my mother was there, holding a jacket over her arm. "You forgot this," she said softly, walking toward me. I smiled faintly. "You followed me." "Of course I did," she said. Mothers never really stop. She sat beside me, close enough that our shoulders touched. For a long while, we just watched the water together. "I used to come here after he died," she said. "It was the only place I could still feel him. You were so angry then. I didn't know how to reach you." "I didn't want to be reached," I admitted. "I wanted to forget." She nodded. "And did you?" I shook my head. "No. I just got good at pretending." We both laughed quietly, the kind of laugh that comes after years of crying. The wind brushed the trees. Somewhere far off, thunder grumbled again, but it didn't sound like a warning this time. More like a heartbeat. As the sun dipped lower, the sky turned gold, then pink. Mom took my hand, and I didn't pull away. For the first time, I didn't feel like the girl who'd run from home. I felt like someone finding her way back. We drove home in silence. The kind of silence that isn't awkward, just fragile, like something new had been born between us and we were both afraid to break it. The sun was setting, painting the road in a dull gold that flickered through the trees. I watched the light dance across the windshield, thinking about how strange it felt to have something like peace in my chest again. It didn't fit yet, but I wanted it to. When we got back, Mom went straight to the garden. The soil was soft from the rain, and she knelt to press her fingers into it, as if grounding herself. I watched her from the porch, realizing how many years I'd missed, not just birthdays and holidays, but all the small, ordinary moments that make a life. The way she hummed while she worked. The way the light always seemed to follow her when she moved. "I thought about selling this place once," she said suddenly, still looking at the ground. "Why didn't you?" She smiled faintly. "Because I kept hoping you'd come home." Her voice cracked on that last word, and I felt it echo in my bones. Home. A word that used to taste like guilt now felt almost soft again. I knelt beside her. "You shouldn't have waited that long." She shrugged. "Mothers are stubborn creatures." I laughed quietly. "Guess I take after you." We worked side by side, pulling weeds and planting a few flowers she'd kept in small pots by the fence. Every handful of earth felt like a small act of repair, something broken being gently put back together. It wasn't about the garden. It was about us. After a while, she said, "You know, your father wasn't perfect." "I know," I said. "Neither am I." She nodded, wiping her hands on her jeans. "He used to worry you'd inherit his temper." "Maybe I did," I said softly. "But I'm learning how to live with it." That night, after she went to bed, I sat in the living room with the lights off. The house creaked in the familiar way old houses do, as if it were breathing. I looked at the framed photographs, birthdays, school plays, the three of us smiling like we had no idea how fragile happiness really was. Forgiveness isn't a moment, I realized. It's a choice. Every morning, every breath, every time you decide not to hate yourself for something you can't change. My phone buzzed on the table, a message from my boss back in the city. "When are you coming back?" I stared at it for a long time. The answer used to be easy. But now, it wasn't. I put the phone face down. For once, I didn't owe anyone a reply. Later, I went upstairs and stood in my old room again. The air smelled faintly of rain and cinnamon. I noticed how the wallpaper was peeling in the corner, how the photo of Dad and me was slightly tilted. I fixed it without thinking, and for a second, my reflection caught in the glass, a woman I barely recognized, but finally didn't want to run from. When I turned off the light, I whispered, "Good night, Dad." It didn't hurt this time. It felt like an answer had already been given, even if I couldn't hear it. The next few days passed quietly, almost too quietly. We fell into a rhythm of breakfast at 8, a walk through the garden, a few soft conversations that felt less like words and more like healing. It was strange how quickly the house had stopped feeling foreign. But peace has a way of testing you, right when you start to believe it's real. It started with the letter. Not the one from my father, another one. A thin white envelope slipped through the mailbox one afternoon while Mom was out shopping. I almost ignored it until I saw the handwriting. It was from the bank in the city. I hadn't paid the rent on my apartment in 2 months. I sat on the porch steps, the letter trembling in my hands. The old panic rose in me, that cold, choking feeling that always came when the life I'd built started to fall apart again. I'd left the city without telling anyone, not even my friends. My job was hanging by a thread. I hadn't wanted to think about any of it. Mom came home then, humming softly. The grocery bag hung from her arm. When she saw me, she stopped. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," I said quickly, folding the letter and shoving it into my pocket. But mothers always know when you're lying. She didn't ask again, just looked at me for a long time. That night, over dinner, she finally said, "You can't keep running from everything. Even peace takes work." I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because she was right, I'd spent my whole life running, even when I wasn't moving. The silence stretched until it hurt. She sighed. "You'll have to go back eventually." I looked up, startled. "You want me to leave?" Her eyes softened immediately. "No, honey. I want you to live. There's a difference." Something inside me twisted. I thought she'd be happy I stayed. That coming back meant I was forgiven, that I could finally belong somewhere again. But maybe forgiveness didn't mean staying, maybe it meant learning how to leave without hate. I stood up abruptly, chair scraping against the floor. "You have no idea what it's like out there. I can't just pick up where I left off." "I know you can't," she said calmly. "But you can start again. That's what people do." I turned away, tears burning behind my eyes. I came back because I couldn't handle it anymore. Because I thought this was where I was supposed to be. She stood too, her voice low but steady. "And maybe it is. But it won't mean anything if you're only hiding here." The argument hung in the air long after it ended. Later that night, I sat outside on the porch, staring into the darkness. The crickets sang, the world moved on like it always did. I thought about Dad, how he used to say that love was the hardest kind of courage. Maybe he was right. Maybe coming home wasn't the hardest thing. Maybe leaving again was. I looked back at the house through the window. Mom was in the kitchen, her figure framed by the warm light. She wasn't angry. Just tired. Tired of losing me, over and over again. I wanted to go inside, to tell her I was sorry. But I didn't. Not yet. Because I realized then, forgiveness wasn't just about being loved. It was about learning how to stay without running, and how to leave without fear. I woke up before sunrise. The house was quiet, the kind of stillness that only happens when two people have said too much and not enough all at once. I sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the soft ticking of the clock downstairs. Each second sounded like a heartbeat, steady and patient, as if the house itself was waiting for something, or maybe someone, to move again. I went downstairs barefoot. The air smelled faintly of last night's rain and coffee grounds. Mom had already been up, judging by the open back door and the folded blanket on the couch. She'd probably gone to the garden again. She always did when she needed to think. I stood by the kitchen counter, staring at the empty mugs from the night before. The fight replayed in my head, word for word, tone for tone. She hadn't said anything cruel, she never did. But that somehow made it worse. It's easier to hate someone who yells. Harder when they speak the truth softly. I picked up one of the mugs and washed it slowly, letting the warm water run over my hands. My reflection wavered in the sink, tired eyes, hair messy from sleep, but something lighter too. The weight that had sat on my chest for years felt different now. Smaller. I thought about what she'd said. "You can't keep hiding here." Maybe she was right. Maybe all this time, I'd confused safety with healing. Maybe the real reason I came back wasn't just to make peace with her or with Dad's memory. Maybe it was to remember who I used to be before grief rewrote me. When I stepped outside, the air was cool and golden. The first light of morning touched the tops of the trees, turning the wet leaves into tiny mirrors. Mom was by the fence, trimming the roses that had finally started to bloom again. She looked peaceful, her face soft in the dawn light. "Morning," I said quietly. She looked up, smiled faintly. "Didn't think you'd be awake this early." "Couldn't sleep," I admitted. She nodded. "It's the thinking hour. Your father used to say that." I smiled at that. It was such a small, ordinary thing to say, but it landed deep. The kind of memory that feels like a hand resting on your shoulder. We stood there for a while, side by side, not needing to fill the silence. Then I said, "You were right. About everything." Her hands stilled on the shears. "That's a first. I've been running from things for so long, I don't even know what standing still feels like anymore." "Then maybe that's what you're supposed to learn now," she said. "How to stand still without breaking." There was something in her tone, not pride, not judgment, just quiet understanding. I realized then that she didn't need me to stay forever. She just needed to know that I could leave without disappearing again. I took a deep breath. "I think I'm ready to go back. To the city, I mean." She looked at me, a flicker of surprise crossing her face before it softened into something else. "Are you sure?" "Yeah," I said. "I don't know what's waiting for me, but I think it's time." She nodded, wiping her hands on her apron. "Then I guess you'd better pack before you change your mind." I laughed softly. "You make it sound so easy." "It isn't," she said. "But it's worth it." For a moment, we just looked at each other, two women standing in the same morning light, both changed in ways they hadn't expected. She reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, like she used to when I was a child. "You look like him when you smile," she whispered. And just like that, I felt it, not the heavy ache of loss, but something gentler. Something that felt a lot like peace. The suitcase sat by the door, half-zipped, like it wasn't sure if it wanted to stay or go. I stared at it for a long time, wondering how something so small could carry so much. Every folded shirt, every book, every letter I chose to keep, all tiny pieces of the person I'd become while trying to find my way back here. Mom was in the kitchen again, humming softly as she cleaned the dishes. It had become her morning song, a sound I would miss more than I wanted to admit. The smell of toast and coffee filled the air, and for a moment, I thought about saying I'd stay one more day. But I knew that wasn't the point. Staying wasn't peace anymore. Leaving was. She turned when she heard me walk in. "You're up early." "Didn't really sleep," I said. "Too many thoughts." "That's how you know you're alive," she smiled. I laughed, shaking my head. "You always have a quote for everything." She shrugged, placing a mug in front of me. "It's a mother's job." We drank in silence. Not the tense kind, not the heavy one from before, this was warm, shared. A silence that meant understanding. The house creaked softly, sunlight spilling through the curtains, catching the dust in the air like glitter. It felt like the world had paused just for us. When I finished my coffee, I stood up. I should get going before I change my mind. She nodded, wiping her hands on a towel. "Do you have everything?" "Yeah. I think so." She gave me a look that said she knew I wasn't talking about luggage. At the doorway, I hesitated. "Mom?" "Yes?" "Thank you." It sounded so small, too small for everything she'd given me, the patience, the forgiveness, the quiet strength of just waiting. But she smiled like it was enough. "There's nothing to thank me for," she said. "Just promise me one thing." "What's that?" "Don't forget where home is." Her voice cracked a little on the word home, and that was it, the last barrier broke. I stepped forward and hugged her. She froze for a moment, then wrapped her arms around me tightly, the way she used to when I was a child who'd fallen off her bike. We stayed like that for a long time, both of us holding on just enough to let go. When I finally stepped back, her eyes were wet, but she was smiling. "Drive safe," she said. "I will." I walked out to the car, the morning light soft and gold over the street. The engine hummed quietly when I turned the key. Through the windshield, I saw her standing on the porch, her hand raised in a small wave. I waved back, and for the first time in years, the word goodbye didn't hurt. The road stretched ahead, winding through trees and light and memory. I rolled down the window, letting the wind rush through, carrying the scent of cinnamon and home and rain. The town faded behind me, small in the rearview mirror. But instead of feeling empty, I felt full of love, of loss, of everything that had shaped me. Because maybe coming home wasn't about staying. Maybe it was about remembering who you were before you forgot. The city felt different when I returned. Or maybe I did. The streets were still loud, the buildings still gray, but the noise didn't scare me anymore. I walked through it all like someone who had finally stopped running, not because the world had changed, but because I had. The apartment was exactly as I'd left it, half unpacked boxes, wilted plants by the window, a single cup in the sink. It used to feel empty. Now it felt like a blank page. A beginning, not an ending. I opened the curtains, letting the afternoon light spill across the room. It was softer than I remembered. Everything was. I took out my phone and scrolled through my messages, work, bills, noise, then stopped when I saw Mom's name. Just seeing it made me smile. "Made it back safe," I typed. Her reply came almost instantly, "Good. Don't forget to eat." I laughed. Some things never changed. I set the phone down and looked around. There was still so much to fix, the job I'd left hanging, the rent, the chaos of a life I'd avoided. But instead of panic, I felt a strange calm. I wasn't hiding anymore. I wasn't scared of the silence. I unpacked slowly, placing small pieces of home around the room, a photo of Dad by the lake, the letter he wrote me, the pressed flower Mom had left in one of my books years ago. Each one felt like an anchor, something solid in the middle of the noise. When evening came, I made tea instead of coffee. It was something Mom used to say, tea reminds you to slow down. I sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker to life one by one. Somewhere out there, people were rushing, arguing, dreaming, breaking, just living. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like one of them. I picked up the letter again. The paper was creased, the ink fading slightly, but the words still clear. "Everything I do because I love you. Even if you can't see that yet." I smiled, tracing the letters with my thumb. "I see it now," I whispered. Outside, a light rain began to fall, gentle and steady. I opened the window and let it in. The smell of wet pavement and spring air filled the room. It reminded me of home, not the house on Maple Street, but something deeper. The kind of home you carry inside you, once you've forgiven yourself enough to live there again. The phone buzzed again, Mom this time, sending a photo. It was the garden, blooming brighter than I'd ever seen it. Underneath, she'd written, "Look what grew back." I stared at the picture for a long time, smiling through the tears that came without sadness. Because she was right. Some things do grow back. Not the same as before, maybe softer, maybe slower, but alive all the same. I closed my eyes and let the sound of the rain fill the room. For the first time in years, I felt whole. And somewhere, deep down, I knew that no matter where I went next, I was finally home.